What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are back with more of The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler, this week for Chapter 8. My quick review at the top, this was a good one. It's kind of hard to top last week. Last week was very good. There was a lot going on and a lot of action, so it makes sense that this week wouldn't be heavily action-based, but it was still a great chapter, as all of the others really have been. So, just like all the others, I still recommend it.
I was a little less enamored with it. I think it was pretty mediocre.
But, okay. So, would you still recommend it? Interesting.
I mean, yes. There are important story elements enough so to say that if you skipped it, it would not be beneficial for you.
Okay.
But I don't recommend it because it's enjoyable.
Okay. Fair enough. So, with that, if you feel like going out and trying to find the story, The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler, this is Chapter 8. In particular, feel free to search for it. You should be able to find it pretty easily enough. And read it, and then feel free to come back here. We would obviously love for you to do that as well. And based on the shirts that we're wearing, stay tuned for the end, and we will have a very special announcement if you have not seen it elsewhere already from us.
Yeah.
But you can also check our Twitter and Facebook. The links to that are in the description. So, but on to the full review itself. At the start of this one, we had Dovin back again.
Yes.
Amy was very happy about that.
My favorite.
He's pretty great. Very interesting character.
Yes, always.
Yes.
Always.
Raul references the fact that everything about him is perfect, right? That the way that he walks and carries himself, that he almost floats across, when he's walking, presumably because he has found the route with, I guess, the least obstruction or like bumps or whatever you want to call it, where he's able to just perfectly glide through a hallway or a room because he knows exactly where to step.
No, I took it to be more like that he was able to perfect the function of his body as he was walking to a point where he could kind of do that.
Even better. That's a fair point.
Right.
Okay. And then when Raul...
So it's probably a combination of the two, if he's able to do it so flawlessly, right?
Mm-hmm. And Dovin kind of makes a dig to Raul where he's like, I guess there's no point in, hiding the fact that I'm a planeswalker since you've told everyone about them. Which is super funny to me. Because obviously he didn't say it exactly like that, but that's how I imagine it, right? That's how I imagine somebody would say that. Just like, well, you spilled the beans, so what the hell do I care about keeping it a secret?
And I feel like the cool thing about Raul is that I feel like he's pretty down to earth. He's he's a pretty normal guy, I feel like. So the way in which he would say things is, I feel like, probably the most similar or pretty close to the most similar planeswalker to the way that we would normally speak,
That's fair.
Does that make
That's
sense?
Fair. Yeah. And then, since they're talking about being planeswalkers and Raul is aware of where Dovin is from, being Kaladesh, kind of asks him why he left, and Dovin's explanation was because of unfortunate local politics.
Yeah.
Was the answer that he gave, which
technically that's accurate.
Yeah, you can't fault him for that. He was being honest. It's pretty funny. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Yeah. But one thing that Amy did not like was that Raul was finding it difficult to like Dovin at all.
Yeah, I was not okay with that. I was like, Dovin is so sexy, so cool, just above all else. And you're just there like, oh, well, he's perfect, but you know what? Not into it. You're wrong. Straight up.
The reason that he was saying that, that he can't find a reason to like him, or it's hard to find a reason to like him, is because of how he has influenced Isperia and influenced the Azorius, and using his abilities or whatever to perfect the way that the Azorius handle their business, which includes a lot of surveillance. And Rahl seems to have a huge problem with that. Not that I blame him or disagree with him, but Rahl seems to have a huge problem with the number of Thopters that now exist that were not a thing on Ravnica prior to Dovinbon showing up. And now they are here. And
he made a point of saying he must have brought those Thopters with him.
Right.
Because they didn't exist here before he showed up.
Yeah, it really wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And it's not wrong, right? That's definitely a thing.
And I love Dovin from previous stories as a character. But if Dovin was a real live guy doing these real life things, I would hate him too.
Oh yeah, that's a fair point.
I do want to say that. I did spend lots of time just now talking about how great he is, but realistically speaking, not so great.
I really liked the line from Rahl where he says to himself, must help with perfection when you know what everyone is doing all the time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's true, too, right? Dovin is able to...
I mean, we wouldn't really know, because regardless of how surveilled we might be as a people, the people who are doing the surveillance are far from perfect, so... We really wouldn't know. But
but I will also say that
I would say it helps.
Right. Well, and I mean, Dovin has the ability to analyze situations and attempt to perfect what's going on, so he has that leg up. But also, you're looking at it from the perspective of Earth, and the people, if you will, doing the surveilling are actually organizations.
Right.
As opposed to one guy in Dovinbon.
Right.
So Dovin, gathering all of that information together, would be able to form a better plan than, say, multiple agencies attempting to work together to try and...
And not even attempting to work together, necessarily. Attempting to work autonomously from each other, and then somehow needing to ultimately work together. Like... kind of autonomously doing that surveillance and forming their own conclusions separately about those pieces of surveillance, and then having to work together ultimately to kind of have a functioning government or economics or whatever.
Right, and that just, especially in comparison to what we're looking at here, presumably just takes too long.
Right, so, right. And there's just too many cooks. Yeah.
Pretty much. So then we hear about Hekara. Last week I had mentioned, because Hekara had gotten hurt from the arrow in her thigh, and she'd cut it out with her blades instead of touching it, because otherwise she would have melted like that troll or ogre or whatever did.
Right.
And I said, it'll be interesting to see whether we hear about Hekara's recovery, wow. Whether we hear
Hekara's
about...
recovery.
Yep, that's what it is.
Cool.
That's what it is from now on. Whether we hear about Hekara's recovery or whether we don't. Like, whether it's just like, and now Hekara's back and she's better now. Because I said, we don't necessarily need to hear it one way or the other. It's just, that's something that could have been given to us or could have not. And they do reference it. We don't actually see the scene, but we hear Rahl kind of reference the fact that Hekara is getting treated, and we also hear about the fact that since they took Hekara to an Izzet treatment facility, the Izzet tend to test their experiments on patients there. And even though that's a thing that Rahl knows and understands, even Rahl is like, those testers are going to be in for a run for their money, basically.
Like, this is the perfect place to take her, because she is going to appreciate it in a way that most people don't.
Not even that. I mean, I think he is feeling bad for the chemisters, or whatever you want to call them, who are going to have to come in and administer these tests, because for most people in those infirmaries, or whatever you want to call them, presumably they are injured or sick or like unable to react. And Hekara, one way or another, is going to have some thoughts, I feel like.
I took it more as her being the Rakdos at heart that she is. She would just love being poked and prodded and probed in the ways
that too. Yeah, there's definitely that too.
Would just hate.
Oh yeah.
So I took it more like she wouldn't want to leave when it was time to be discharged, or the number and intensity of tests could really be cranked up a notch, or 12.
Right. And then we hear about just a comment that Raul makes that I thought was kind of fun. He talks about talking about the upcoming guild summit, wondering who the Bolus agents could be to show up to that summit. And he references Lazov. And he says that Lazov claims not to be, but Raul's not convinced. And yet, in the next breath, Raul is like, but I'm starting to trust Veraska, despite Lavinia's concerns. So once again, Amy's point that you made last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever, where Lavinia is too smart and people don't deserve her,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
She's
Hermione Granger, straight up.
Right.
She
warns and they don't listen. And
right. She's the only one with a brain in her friggin' head, and she's just in a world of idiots, and she's just trying to make it through and trying to help them as much as she can, and they just never appreciate it.
Yeah. And while we're referencing back to things that we talked about in the previous weeks, last week we talked about the fact that we saw the depiction of Kaya killing the Ghost Council and receiving all of the contracts from the council themselves, but more specifically mostly from Grandpa Karlov. And I said last week, that I wasn't sure how that would be handled in the future, because it was a little bit of a cliffhanger for us at the end of that chapter of like, why did she go unconscious? What happened to her? And it would have been a better cliffhanger if we didn't know what happened to her from reading the novel, right? Because these stories were supposed to have come out first. And so it would have been a lot cooler of a reveal had we not known previously that, it's that she's gaining all these contracts and she's going to become the guildmaster. But I will somewhat retract my statement of that, because this time when we saw Kaya and saw her talk to Teysa about the situation, we still were able to learn new information, despite the fact that this is so much prior to what we've arguably already seen from Kaya when she was in the novel. But we still hear about the fact that Teysa's like, look, I'm working with the law mages. I'm going to try to get these contracts out of you. Until then, you're the guildmaster. There's nothing we can do about it.
We're just going to have to deal.
Right. I'm working on it, but you can't leave until then. And Kai's like, of course I can. I need to get out of here. And Teysa's like, you could try, but as soon as you do, you're going to be torn apart, right? All of these contracts are going to come due at the same time, and you're going to breach all of them, and it could drive you mad, it could kill you, whatever.
And of course, Kai is like, I can't tell her the reason why I gotta leave. I can't be like, well, Nicol Bolas needs me to keep doing his bidding or whatever.
Well, it's not even that. It's.
Or I need to clean up the fact that Nicol Bolas is threatening me with those. Or he destroyed her home plane or whatever it was. What was it?
No, he seemingly promised her that he would fix the sky. That's all that we had heard prior to.
Oh, we don't know.
That's all that we had heard prior to this story. In this story, the other thing that we heard about the sky. Let me see if I definitely wrote it down, but it was a blue sky shot through with scintillating cracks like a zigzagging rainbow. And a world that went a little madder every year. And that was what Bolus was supposedly claimed that he could fix. Now again, to be fair, it's unclear whether he was the cause of that or not. But at the same time...
Because there are plenty of things that he turns out to be the cause of, that he was just using to say, I can fix this thing that's a really big problem. Just as a manipulation so that he could control people, when in reality he had caused the issue himself.
Well, and Kaya even points out the fact when she sees him later on in this story, or sees somebody speaking through, Bolus speaking through somebody else, she says, you did this on purpose. You knew that I was going to gain all of these contracts and have to become the guildmaster, so that's why you hired me to kill the Ghost Council. It had nothing to do with Bolus needing the Ghost Council out of the way. it was seemingly Bolus needing Kaya either out of the way and or trapped on Ravnica.
See, I see it more as he needs someone who he controls to be in that position.
Well, and then it's a fair point, because then
Right.
immediately after that he says, I can get those contracts out of you, but here's what you have to do for me.
Right.
And so immediately goes back into manipulation mode and tries to get her to do more of his bidding.
Right. I don't know. At the same time, I feel like maybe it's just a bit all too convenient. Like, the people who he goes and manipulates and influences are too conveniently exactly what he needs, and maybe that, can be explained away by just, well, that's all that more of a reason for him to feel justified in what he's doing, right? Like, Kaya is particularly suited to kill these ghosts, right? And I need someone I control in that seat, and I need somebody to do my bidding. And so it's very convenient for me to be able to manipulate her specifically, as opposed to some other random planeswalker or a person, right? I feel like too often the people that he chooses and supposedly chooses far in advance tend to be very, very conveniently suited for what he's doing years out.
Okay.
And so I think there's two ways to explain that. One, the story just needs it, so it's convenient. And two, it's a way for him to feel like he's even that much more powerful and that much more deserving, because it wouldn't be so convenient for him if that weren't the case, right?
Okay. Well, and I also, since we're talking about Bolus, I also thought it was kind of interesting that he mentions to Kaya that law magic has been his forte for some time. And it's like, law magic, I thought, hieromancy,
Right.
the other word for it, the fancy word for it, I thought was white mana based.
Right.
Which Bolus is not. Now,
Correct.
Orzhov are white-black. So it would make sense that they could have law mages on the white mana side of things. But if law magic in any way bleeds to the black mana side of things, then Bolus being Grixis red, blue, black might be a thing that he could do. But I was not aware of it. So to me it was like, oh, it's Superman. He just has whatever powers he needs at any given time. Or, because he is Nicol Bolas, he could just be lying.
Right. See, I took it to mean more good and evil. Good law magic is white, and bad law magic is black.
Magic has been
like
trying
if you're truly evil and you're able to manipulate that law magic to do evil bidding, then it would be a black.
For somewhat obvious reasons, Wizards has been trying to move away from white is good, black is evil. So I don't know that that's really the best look for this in particular. I think, and especially, you know what, the other reason, right? I don't want to bring it entirely into, it's a racial thing, and that's the only reason why. No, from a Vorthos standpoint, it really does limit your storytelling ability when black are your villains and that's it, or white are your good guys and that's it, right? You want to be able to, that's why they were super happy. I remember Wizards was super happy with Yahenni as a character, because they were able to take, and Etherborn as a race in general, because they were able to take a color of mana and create a creature type for that color of mana that is not just inherently like they're a zombie or a vampire, like they're a monster of some kind. Right. Now you have Etherborn, who, despite what you may think of how they look, they are kind of inherently like philosophical characters, and like they can be intellectuals. They can be one way or the other, to be honest, right? They can be evil or good or bad or good or whatever you want to call it, but it's not inherently one way or the other, right? You're not gonna, Wizards isn't gonna be trying to print a philosophical or a good zombie character necessarily, but they don't have to. They can expand their design space in the black mana area to be more than demons, right? Or zombies or whatever. So that is something that they're trying to move away from. Again, for one reason or another. you choose what it is. It could be all of the above. It could be the very obvious one, and it could be a bunch of different reasons. But that is.
You had to bring up Yahenni.
Sorry, Amy loves Yahenni, everyone.
I miss Yahenni.
I also wanted to point out the scene with Kaya talking to Teysa. Oh, we said this already. Sorry. I feel like I got cut off, which is why I feel like I didn't get. No.
Yeah, because I went off on a tangent.
That's completely fine. I just wanted to point out the fact that I loved that we were still able to get more from that, despite the fact that even last week, right, I sat here and said, like, I don't know how they're going to do more with it. We already know all the information. We didn't. Right. And the question, and the other thing that I liked about it is, this is, I think, the first time in these prequel stories where I developed a question in my mind that I feel like even the novel has not answered yet. Or by the time we get to the novel, it wasn't answered yet. And that is, are the contracts going to get out of Kaya? Right? At the end of the novel, we find out that Kaya is going to be out seeking someone. I don't remember who. Lily? Maybe? Was it Lily who Kaya was after? Because it was like Kaya, Vraska, and Rahl were going out, branching off to go search for 3 different people. And it was, I think Rahl was going after Tezzeret. Vraska was going after someone, or somebody was going after Dovin as well. So anyway, those 3 people were going after those other 3 people. Whoever Kaya is going to search for, if she can't leave Ravnica without the contracts coming due, how's that going to work out? And presumably we will find out in War of the Spark Forsaken by Greg Weisman.
Right.
And we will see how that is. Stay tuned to the channel. You know we're going to be reviewing it. That's just how it works. I mean, again, I want to find out what happens, and so then once we do find out, we can talk to all of you about it. So we will have a lot of things coming up for Throne of Eldraine stuff, for War of the Spark Forsaken. Just bear with us that it may not be like, hey, the book was released last week. We have a full review for you. It's not gonna work out that way, right? Because we still have.
We're gonna do it piece by piece.
Yes. Well, and not even that, but we still have more of these chapters to do. Like a lot of stuff is gonna start overlapping, so stay tuned. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. If we have answers, we will give them to you as we figure them out.
And also, try to understand that we're gonna try and do the best that we can do.
Oh yeah.
You know, because there's a level of stretching ourselves too thin that we're not going to be able to achieve, especially because of the announcement that we will make later. So
I was going to say that. Yeah, stay tuned to the end. More about this story. Then we get to the kind of big climactic ending with Rahl Zarek doing the flashback again. And it's been a bit, but as I've stated in past weeks, for past chapters, they continue to remind you about it, though. They continue to hook you by saying things like, well, Rahl remembers when he was a kid walking down these streets, or, he awakes from his dream that he had, and this happens. Every chapter is reminding you, so that even if you finished reading that first flashback where Rahl meets Nicol Bolas, and you put the book down at that point and walk away, and you don't come back to it for 2 weeks, that's their way of reminding you, hey, listen, don't forget, this happened, it's important. And why is it important? At least for the end of this chapter. If not for more in the future, which we don't know yet. Right. We will have to read and find out. But but at least now, at minimum now, is why that flashback occurred and why they kept reminding you of it. Because Rahl had a boyfriend in Elias, or a significant other, whatever they called each other. A partner in Elias. And Elias was an artist, or a poem writer, or what have you. And Elias was throwing parties, and Rahl was doing odds and ends work for Nicol Bolas. And it seemed like he was kind of going out to scare people who owed debts to Bolus, or owed debts to people who worked for Bolus, right? They were like bookies or debt collectors or loan sharks or whatever.
Owed debts to people who, you know,
don't like being owed things
right.
for too long, right? They'll loan you the money,
right?
But then you pay back.
I very much liked that section of this story because it very much reminded me of like New York crime bosses.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Where you got little different like mafia dons and things like that, you know.
Yeah,
I can respect that. Some very good stories came out of stuff like that.
Well, I mean, they referenced tenements and things like that, and it really took me to that sort of period of time in New York City where you had territories that were controlled by certain racial groups, right? And then you had everyone else basically living in slums and you know, just fighting for survival because they were eating dead rats. You know, it's very sort of like muckraker sort of mindset that I just kind of fell into when we were reading that portion.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, Amy is the history buff out of the two of us. That's not me. That is not something, as I'm almost certain I've made this joke before, but that is not something I am a geek for. That is, but it is always something that I'm happy to learn and hear about. I don't in any way mean to disparage it. It's interesting because it's things that like, oh yeah, I did learn about that and then completely forgot it afterwards.
Well, I just enjoy like sort of reading these stories and then doing these reviews and saying this is like the point in time and place that my mind went to for this section of the story, and getting to say it in these reviews and then having the author or other people come back and say, oh my god, you got that. Like I put that nugget in there on purpose because I wanted that to be where your mind went.
Oh yeah.
Like having somebody kind of communicate that back is just so cool.
Yeah, oh definitely. Yeah, and it's got to be very validating because...
Well, not so much validating as just like cool, you know, because you're like, okay, like the communication that was supposed to occur when this story was written and then inversely read happened.
Yeah.
What was supposed to happen happened, right? And so there's a fulfillment there, you know, a conclusion, a full circle feeling.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Sorry.
And no, it's fine. It's fine.
Back on task.
No, it's fine because then we get to, like I said, the big finale. Rahl goes to a home again. He's been kind of shaking people down for their debts, and he goes into a building, and it was weird. The way I read the description, I thought it was an older person, but it didn't. An older woman in the home, but it didn't seem that way. But again, he talked about the fact that even though people were going to work in the factories or whatever the equivalent is to the factories, you know, they were doing their day-to-day work, and then had to come home and do secondary work to supplement that.
Yeah.
Which, what?
That sounds familiar.
No, I can't imagine that at all.
No.
What secondary work would people do that in their lives that might... I have no idea. I've never heard of such a thing. The good old gig economy that we...
Right. Rahl Zarek picking up the odds and ends jobs.
Yeah.
Nicol Bolas gives him.
Yeah, and this woman is like knitting or whatever it is to like make clothing and try to sell it, and she references that. She's like, I'm gonna get money. Look, I'm making these things. I'm doing it as fast as I can.
Right.
And Rahl goes there and he's like kind of sparking his hand because we also learn that Nicol Bolas has been teaching him to harness his power into a weapon. So he can like electrocute people and shoot lightning at people and stuff, as opposed
really
to
dangerous.
Oh yeah. Well, and we find out that immediately.
But it's an intimidation.
Yes, and that's all that he seemingly was using it for. You know,
trying.
But he said he hadn't had to kill anyone for Nicol Bolas yet, but it seems like he had maybe had to injure. So. It's about sending a message. Right. It's a message of fear. It's a message of we're not fooling around. Your loan shark is not fooling around. You owe them this money, and Raul was purely attempting to scare this woman. And he was caught off guard by someone running out of another room and stabbing him in the side.
Yeah.
And with that shock, he kind of reaches out his hand to instinctively push the person away.
Right.
But his hand was crackling with power at that time. And so when he pushed the person away, he shot electricity into that person, which turned out to be a 10-year-old boy. Which is awful. That's heartbreaking. Like that, just reading that from Raul's perspective and the realization that Raul has come to, because I could see it happening, right, visually. That's the sign of a good story. You're able to properly visualize it. It's a kid running out of a back room, like, leave my mommy alone. He really feels like he's going to help. And it's a little kid, right? That is not going to be effective.
Right.
Small child, I'm sorry. You're not going to kill this man and or stop him if he is what you and your mother are afraid he is, which is an assassin or whatever. Like somebody coming to
a guy who's mad that you haven't paid your bill.
Right, and is going to injure or kill, yes. You're not going to be effective, 10-year-old child, in stopping this man because he has come here to do that job because he's good at it.
Right, right.
And
they
yet...
don't just ask anybody to do that for them.
Well, and yet, in spite of that, Raul is not controlled enough to be able to respond to getting stabbed by retracting his electricity abilities before pushing the child away, or even realizing what he's doing.
Right.
And so he shoves this child away, jolting him with so much electricity, and the description used of, you see him fly backwards, and his arms and legs are all, gyrating and flopping around, and then he slams into the back wall, and the mother kind of nestles her son, and Raul goes over and is able to absorb the, I guess, latent electricity still in the boy's body.
Right.
To bring him back to normal, because I think Raul said his heartbeat was like very erratic, or rapid.
Arrhythmic or whatever.
Yeah, whatever it is. But he was able to draw the electricity out of him to kind of return him to normal. I mean, the kid's pretty messed up, but
to attempt to return him to normal.
Right. As normal as he could. The child is definitely not, from the way I read it, the child's definitely not going to die, but is injured now. And the mother is like...
hopefully he learned not to stab people.
Yeah, right? Clearly it was his fault.
Abby.
But the mom is like, please, I'll pay, just don't hurt my son. And Raul just kind of leaves. Right?
Yeah, because he's like, he's in shock, really.
Get it? This one, right?
But he's in shock.
Yeah. And and he's in shock both from what he just did and from blood loss. Because then, then he gets back home, or traipses his way back home, and as he gets to his place, he just has not stopped bleeding the whole way, which is a problem. I mean, that's the story even says he probably nicked an artery, because anybody who's gotten a little cut knows after a short period of time that should stop bleeding.
Right.
Even if your adrenaline is high and your blood's pumping, you're probably gonna not be dripping blood from a wound. 10, 15, 20 minutes after you've been stabbed?
Unless you're on blood thinners, or you have some kind of a disease that causes that.
Also,
disease.
Also, I did not know that this was coming up. And I did not call this by doing it, but I'm going to jump back again to last week or 2 weeks ago. I think it was last week. If you get a foreign object in your body, don't pull it out. There's your health tip with Joe. If that knife stayed in Raul's side, he probably would not have bled that much.
He would have been fine.
I don't know about fine. If it was in an artery, probably not. Moving around and stuff.
He would have been fine because he would have gone to a hospital where they would have adequately, presumably, been able to remove it and stop the bleeding.
Hopefully. The thing is, he removed it. And so it would have been what was stopping up the artery from spurting and or draining blood out of his body. And instead, he immediately removed the knife and threw it away. Again, your health tip of the week with Joe,
Stop doing it.
Don't do it.
It's real dumb.
It's really dumb. Again, I did not know this part was coming, but I think it's very apropos that it was 2 weeks in a row that I get to tell you, if you get something in you, don't take it out of you. Just go see someone who is a professional at that kind of thing.
If it's particularly long and you know it's going to get hit and cause further internal damage, then try to break it or cut it shorter so that that's not going to happen, maybe. But don't pull it out. That's like the worst idea.
Very, very bad. You could also just call 911 and ask them. I have a blank in my blank. How do I deal with this problem?
There's so many good things to say there.
The second word will always be ass. I get it. I'm sorry, I get it. Okay?
The first word is true.
Gross. And then we get the continuation of this finale. Raul gets home.
The string fell off.
Elias... I'm going to move right on and pretend you didn't say that. Elias was throwing a party, as far as Raul knew. So Raul is going into this home, and now I'm thinking while reading this story, right? He hears noises or talking or whatever in the back room. He hears laughing, and Raul is like stumbling in the house, bleeding as he goes, like leaving drops of blood. And I'm like, wow, Raul is about to walk into this party that Elias is throwing. He's going to be bleeding everywhere, and he's going to ruin this guy's party. Now, to be fair, that doesn't mean that Raul should not do it. He needs medical assistance.
Yeah, but so don't go home. Go to the hospital, you friggin' idiot.
Well, but who knows if his activities were less than legal? Going to the hospital. For you and I, that's true. Go to the hospital.
Yes.
Always go to the hospital.
Even with a gunshot wound.
For Raul Zarek, he may have thought, hey, what I'm doing is not fully legal. Maybe I can get some help elsewhere. But regardless, he goes home. And again, I'm expecting him to now burst into Elias's party and ruin Elias's party. Which I guess arguably he did. One way or the other.
You ruined a party, all right.
Raul walks in and sees Elias with a larger, muscular man, and the two of them are kissing. As Raul puts it, hungrily kissing.
Yes.
Which is a very great descriptive word.
Yes.
I liked that a lot. Hungrily kissing. And Elias's response is like, what am I supposed to do? You're always working all the time, which is... By the way, tips with Joe, wrong answer. Not what you say in that moment. You work so much, what was I supposed to do? Really? Okay. Anyway, don't do that. But that causes Raul, in that moment of blood loss and what have you, it causes him to go into his own head. And in his own head, he's thinking, I've been doing these odd jobs for you. I've been doing them so that you can... The phrase that was used was like, so that they could keep up the lifestyle that they had become accustomed, essentially. Because Elias was doing pretty well. And as couples, presumably in this day and age, and everybody's situation is different, but I can at least relate to this. Okay. When one member of a couple is trying to do something to better themselves or something that they feel is their calling, but it is not in and of itself earning them lots of capital, typically the other person in the relationship is usually willing to be able to, if they have the means, financially support that person in those ventures. Because they want that person to succeed. They love that person. That's kind of the idea. And so if you have those means, you are able to discuss that as a couple and come to a decision and an agreement where, listen, you want to go do this thing. It will lead to a career in the future. It will lead to more profit in the future. You're willing to do the work that is necessary to earn the money to support both of you for a short period of time, for a period of time, until that person is done doing that thing and or has gotten far enough into that career or what have you.
And where they're actually helping in terms of finances.
Right. That's a very, very common, typical thing.
Right.
And it makes perfect sense. And Raul's point was, I was doing all of this for you, for us, but for you, so that you could continue to pursue your talents. And build those up and build up, presumably with all the parties and stuff, network and build up your connections in the world of art or poetry writing or all of the above.
Right.
To
or at
get
least like get your name out there enough that it's in people's minds, and hopefully they will more often actually check out your work.
right. And he didn't use these words, but the phrase "and this is how you repay me," right, comes to mind.
So standard. So
But he didn't. So okay.
Housewives Lifetime movie or whatever.
And so because that is a trope, that trope was not fully utilized of the "this is how you repay me," but instead of storming out, or in that instance of him losing a ton of blood, just collapsing on the ground in that moment after figuring it out or seeing it or whatever.
Right, and then there's that awkward scene of the other random guy going, "Is that blood?
Yeah.
Should I leave?" This is an awkward conversation, and you're bleeding.
Yeah, and if you remember, the other guy was like, because then Elias gets upset, which again, still no. He's like, "Are you drunk?" And the other guy's like, "No, dude, I think that's blood." It's like,
I think your boyfriend's bleeding out, yo. Might want to
so then
start giving a shit.
And so then this is, I guess, the culmination. I'll go to Amy after I describe this last part, because I'm curious what you have to say. But as he is standing there bleeding out, having seen his boyfriend cheating on him, and or some people only define sexual intercourse as cheating, but kissing another man, however you want to refer to that, betraying him in some way. His response to all of that is his spark ignites. Again, pun absolutely not intended, but still. His spark ignites and he planeswalks for the first time. And that is how the story ends, but what was your thought?
I think that's stupid. To me, it makes perfect sense if he almost killed this kid with his electrocution, right? And then he sparks. Or he actually does kill the kid and then he sparks. Or there's an interaction with Nicol Bolas where he is finding out from Nicol Bolas that all the hard work that he's been doing for Nicol Bolas is not actually helping his situation with his boyfriend and at all, right? But it's different, I think, to walk in on your boyfriend kissing a guy and just be like, that's what's gonna get me. Not almost killing a child. Nah. My boyfriend was kissing a dude, so therefore I got a spark. It's not realistic enough for me.
Well, so I will somewhat agree with you, somewhat not. And the second half, the somewhat not, is really more devil's advocate.
Okay.
Sparking is supposed to be during periods of emotional distress of some kind. Because these are stories to be consumed for entertainment purposes, yes, it would be simple to assume that, excuse me, it would be simple to assume that there's going to be an interesting story behind everyone's sparking moment. But at the same time, while there are not a lot of planeswalkers, there's gotta be a few whose sparking story is kind of lame. There's got, that's my thought.
Zarek? I mean,
again, he's a cool guy, and we may like him as a character. That doesn't mean that everyone's sparking story is going to be awesome.
It's not about the story. It's about the traumatic experience causing causing a reaction that's that violent.
Well,
right?
and so maybe, again, still devil's advocate, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. Maybe the act of what he did to that child was not as traumatic for him because in his mind, his response was, well, I'm doing this for Elias and myself. And so the end justifies the means. The woman didn't pay. The kid got hurt, but he stabbed me. And so I'm going to go home to Elias and I'm going to be okay. And then he goes home to Elias.
That's seriously fucked up.
but again, it's all speculation.
Right.
That was not technically in the story, although I guess could be inferred from how the story was written, but it's not definitively what the author meant.
I think what
It's
they're
just,
trying to do is the fact that they keep talking about like the flashing back to that and the flashbacks to his childhood and the flashbacks to Nicol Bolas. Like, I guess they're just trying to say, like, look at all of these little straws that were on the camel's back and they all did this to him. But I just find it weird because I don't feel that we've seen that in the past. From sparks igniting, it's usually like one traumatic experience,
big thing,
causing this, cataclysmic thing. And now it's like, okay, pile on another straw, pile on another straw, pile on another straw, pile on another straw. Now he sparks. And perhaps that's actually more realistic. Like, maybe it's more realistic to think that an actual person, right, who experienced all these separate terrible things would ultimately have a psychotic break, let's say, as opposed to someone who just has this one traumatic event and then have that happen, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem consistent with what we've seen in the past for Planeswalker Sparks.
And the other question that I had following reading this, and I don't know if it's necessarily one we have to answer now or whether we just put it out there and maybe in the coming weeks we answer it, but did Nicol Bolas cause Ral to spark? Not on purpose, not it was part of his plan, not he sensed it in Ral, but is it Bolas's fault that Ral sparked? Bolas's jobs were keeping Ral away from home, which is what caused or led to Elias's betrayal. Ral completing one of his jobs for Nicol Bolas is what caused him to get stabbed. It's what caused him to lose control or lack control enough to injure this child, which he was only able to do because Bolas trained him to use his abilities as a weapon. And so you talk about straw on the camel's back, all of those are because of Bolas.
Right.
All of those things together are because of Bolas. But there was a step further from that, right? Bolas taught Ral to use his abilities as a weapon. But he then accidentally used them because he didn't fully have control.
Right.
So that's something separate. Ral was off doing jobs for Nicol Bolas. Because of that, Ral was doing it so often that Elias felt that he needed to go into the arms of another man. Is that Bolas's fault? Not necessarily. It might be Ral's fault. Maybe he didn't have to work as much as he had to work. All of those things combined together, Bolas was the common focal point from all of those things. But does that mean that it was Bolas's fault that Ral sparked and became a planeswalker? And in the future, ironically enough, helped lead to Bolas's downfall. Because Niv Mizzet, reborn, was the distraction that allowed Liliana controlling Oketra and Bantu to take the God Spark out of Bolas, and Niv Mizzet would not have been reborn if not for the efforts of Ral Zarek as a planeswalker. Did he do that? Did Bolas sign his own death knell, if you will, because his machinations of attempting to manipulate the young Ral Zarek ended up leading to that?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. And I think, maybe that's kind of a way of paying back the convenience that I was referring to earlier, where the convenient manipulatee time and time again ultimately just ends up with you creating your own demise.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of that Oedipal complex kind of thing,
Right.
where you find out your future, or you find out a portion of your future, and then in your efforts to manipulate and prevent that future from happening. You just cause it.
Right, and it's also the Batman Joker concept, where Joker at one point says to Batman, "I wouldn't exist without you.
Right.
You know,
right.
I need you to fuel me, and vice
Right,
versa.
right.
Really, you know."
Right. Without the hero that Batman is, Joker wouldn't need to exist, because that balance wouldn't have to occur.
Right, and he wouldn't have to increase his intelligence and abilities and efforts because there wouldn't be somebody to stop him. So he would have stayed as like a petty criminal or whatever you want to interpret that as meaning. But
Right.
that was the phrase between the two, the interaction. But
Yeah.
so. With that, I mean, again, like I said, I don't think that question that I asked is going to be answered right now, unless you just think, no, Joe, that's dumb. And that's fair. That's fair. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below about that question, about anything at all from this episode. And before we do our little closing, as I said, we're wearing t-shirts today with some characters on them that you may see.
I don't know if you can see mine.
Yeah, you can. That you may find familiar to you. We highly encourage you. Earlier this week, we launched our second YouTube channel. This one, not focused on Magic the Gathering. It is focused on video games. Not specifically, although with the characters that we're wearing, not specifically Nintendo, although that will be a big part of it because it was a big part of lots of people's childhoods. I'm not going to explain to you the entire concept because there's a whole channel for you to watch. There's a trailer on that channel. I will see what I can do at the end of this video to link you to that.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can search Video Games for All.
Yeah.
Video Games for All, brought to you by Geek for All. So feel free to go check that out if that's something that you're interested in. If it's not, no hard feelings. Either way, we really hope that you enjoyed this particular episode of JaAR. As I said, leave your thoughts in the comments down below about anything at all. Anything.
Please.
And
we actually genuinely care what you have to say. And
always.
as I referenced in this particular episode specifically, when that conversation of that back and forth happens, it's very fulfilling.
Yes, definitely. So, and it's a great way to join us in showing off your...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
I think I did the wrong hand movement on that one. Anyway,
Oh,
lots
is
of
there a
things are...
specific hand
I feel like
movement?
oh no, this is when I guess I introduce you, or we say Joe and Amy.
I didn't realize it was so specific. Does that make me wrong?
I guess
I
not.
probably
It
should
probably
have
makes,
realized by now.
it
if
probably
was that
makes
specific.
me wrong, is really what it is. But either way, thank you all so very much for watching. This has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All, now the Geek for All family of channels. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.